where is Shedeur Sanders going to get drafted? Because the Cleveland Browns made a move over the weekend that potentially takes them out of the running for Shedeur Sanders. And if they don't draft Shedeur, that could send them flying down the draft board and also could shake up the entire top 10 of the NFL draft here that's going to happen in just over a week. But before we jump into it, hope you're all are having a fantastic, fantabulous, awesome freaking day. My name is Garrett Shoemake, and this is the Shoemake Take. Hope y'all are doing pretty well. So Shedeur Sanders, his draft position is now completely in the air. I was someone who has said for weeks now, maybe for a couple of months now, that Shedeur Sanders is going top 5. He's going to the Browns. He's going to the Giants. They both need a quarterback. There's no reason for them to pass on Shedeur Sanders. But then the Giants signed Russell Wilson and Jameis Winston. And now the Browns, back to the team at that end point, they brought back quarterback Joe Flacco. And for the Browns, they now have 3 quarterbacks on their roster. Deshaun Watson, Kenny Pickett, and now Joe Flacco. They have 2 quarterbacks that are going to compete for the starting job, right? Joe Flacco is probably going to win it out. He brings you stability at the quarterback position for sure, considering how well he played for the Browns a couple years ago, and then showing in his brief stint with Indianapolis, he showed good signs, right? Despite the fact that he's in his 40s now, right? Or late 30s at the earliest. But now, with the Browns signing Joe Flacco, none of the quarterbacks in the top, or one of the teams in the top 6 are in an urgent need for a quarterback. So now, Shedeur Sanders could go anywhere. Now, I will officially say this, I'm no longer confident that Shedeur Sanders is going to go top 5 in the draft. Now, can he still go top 5? Most certainly he can, right? You know, there's nothing saying that the Giants or Browns or Raiders won't draft Shedeur Sanders. That's still on the board, right? We will not know where he ends up until we hear his name get called on draft night, ultimately, right? Same thing even with Cam Ward. Even though Cam Ward's going to Tennessee, in my opinion, we don't know 100% until Roger Goodell walks up on the podium and says it. So let's talk about where Shedeur Sanders could actually end up going, starting with the situations in the top 10 for quarterbacks. Number 1, Miami's take, the quarterback out of Miami, Cam Ward's going to the Tennessee Titans. That's practically a set and done deal, right? Practically, right? In theory. Number 2 to the Cleveland Browns. This is where I've had him mocked in all of my mock drafts and would have been my mock draft 3.0, which would have came out today. But now because of this, now I have to actually think about this discussion and then make a new mock draft according to how I feel, what I conclude here. Because I have not made my conclusion yet about where I want Shedeur Sanders, or where I think Shedeur Sanders will go. Not where I want him to go, where I think he should. Let me reword that, sorry. But Cam Ward to the Titans, that's done. The Browns, he could still go to the Browns because a quarterback room of Joe Flacco, who's going and entering his 40s, if not already in his 40s. Kenny Pickett, a first-round bust that was awful in Pittsburgh, mid at best. And then you got a quarterback in Deshaun Watson, who's not going to be ready for the season. And after the comments that Jimmy Haslam made about Deshaun Watson saying that the trade was a mistake, I don't think Deshaun Watson's ever playing for the Browns again. I don't think it's going to happen. Sorry, I don't think it is. So there's still definitely more stability for the Browns at quarterback, but there's nothing set in stone. But at the same time, Joe Flacco gives you a better chance to win now than Shedeur Sanders does. And last I checked, GM Andrew Berry and head coach Devin Stefanski, their seats are kind of warm right now. Your seat is not safe. Your job is not safe after winning only 3 games and finishing with a 2nd overall pick in the draft. So they could be looking to draft somebody else to help them win now. And if the Browns don't draft Shedeur Sanders, they're taking Abdul Carter because they want another pass rusher to pair with Myles Garrett. And you look at the quarterbacks that are in that division. You have potentially Aaron Rodgers in Pittsburgh or another first-round quarterback, right? 2 pass rushers will make that person's life difficult. The Bengals, then their offensive line. If the Browns want a chance to compete with the Bengals, having 2 great pass rushers will make Joe Burrow's life very difficult. And then you look at Lamar Jackson. The Browns were upset the Ravens earlier in the season, or I think mid-season last year, I'm pretty sure. I can't remember. They did beat the Ravens once. And having 2 great pass rushers getting after Lamar Jackson, that makes his life difficult. And so if you're not confident in the quarterback prospects available to you after Cam Ward, get a player that will still make the opposing quarterback's life difficult. And taking Abdul Carter would be the perfect situation, perfect spot for the Browns to take, for the Browns to take here if they don't take Shedeur. The Giants, I don't think they're going to draft Shedeur because they signed Russell Wilson, they signed Jameis Winston, they brought back Tommy DeVito. Same thing, they're not going to add a fourth quarterback to that roster. And also, head coach Brian Daboll and GM Joe Schoen are on the hot seat. They're on a hotter seat than Andrew Berry and Kevin Stefanski over in Cleveland. So they're trying not to get fired. So they're going to draft Travis Hunter. I've had the Giants drafting Travis Hunter in all of my mock drafts. I had him going 3rd overall from the get-go because he's the best. Because even if Shedeur Sanders went 2nd to the Browns, Cam Ward 1st to Tennessee, Travis Hunter's still the best player on the board. He's still available. And the Giants, they need help at wide receiver. They need help at DB. And get you a Heisman Trophy winner, get you a generational talent that can do both. That can help you in both spots. Now, is he going to play every snap like he did in Colorado? No. I'll tell you that right now, he is not doing that. I'm not saying that he can't. I'm saying that he won't because it is not beneficial. There is no upside to doing that, and it's going to hurt his longevity in the NFL. Simply put, that's a fact. So, either way, Travis Hunter is going to help the New York Giants win now. He's going to help them do that. And the Giants, like I said, Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll are trying to not get fired. And with the quarterback moves that they made, they're not in a hurry to draft a quarterback because they're more concerned with keeping their jobs and really, not building for the future. Well, obviously they're building for the future, right? But they're more concerned with drafting players that'll help them win now and not get fired, like I said. Then you get to the Patriots. They drafted Drake May. They're not drafting Abdul Carter. Then you get to the 5th overall pick, Jacksonville. They're not drafting Abdul Carter. They're not drafting Shedeur Sanders. They have Trevor Lawrence, right? 6th overall is now where we get interesting because this whole time, most people have had Ashton Jeanty going to the Raiders at number 6 because they need a running back. And while that's very much true, and that's still could very likely be the pick, the Raiders were one of the original teams that Shedeur Sanders was mocked to, if you remember. When early mock drafts came out, people had Shedeur Sanders going number 6 to the Raiders. A lot of people did because the Browns were unsure, the whole time, were never really set on Shedeur Sanders. The Giants, a lot of people thought that Shedeur Sanders would go to the Giants even when they held the 1st overall pick earlier in the year. That's what people wanted, either that or Cam Ward, right? But as the Giants signed Russell Wilson and then signed Jameis Winston, then Russell Wilson, that door quickly shut itself. But the Raiders were a team that was always mocked, Shedeur was always mocked to early on in the process because not only do they got a new head coach in Pete Carroll, right? They had Tom Brady in an executive role, which he knows better than anybody that if you want a quarterback, you have to draft him, sit him, develop him, right? And you look at Tom Brady and Shedeur Sanders' relationships, they've thrown together, they know each other personally, and the fact that they're similar players, that they're not physically gifted, they're not insanely physically talented. So a lot of the little things they have to do right in order to make up for that. Kind of like a Brock Purdy, for example, in San Francisco. So the situation for the Raiders would be a really good one for Shedeur Sanders to fall into. And even if now, it could still be an even better situation because they traded for Geno Smith, gave him money. They plan to use him to help them win now while Shedeur sits, learns, and develops. And so by the time that Geno Smith is gone, you have a quarterback that's ready to step in, has command of the offense, understands what's being asked of him. And by that point, you have a couple other drafts, maybe one more draft of the team being built around Shedeur, being built to make this roster better, right? You have good coaching. Here you go. Now we can go win. Now the Raiders organization's turned around. But that's still not a guarantee because the Raiders are a team that are trying to win, right? You don't go revamp your coaching staff and go trade for a quarterback like Geno Smith and give him the money that you gave him to draft a quarterback behind him and sit him and learn him. You're drafting him and you're doing all these moves and getting Geno Smith because you want to win now. You want to win right now. And that, like I said, that completes, to Shedeur Sanders, kind of losing my train of thought here, could go to the Raiders for the situations that I listed, but also there's very much reason to believe that because of all the situations, they're not interested in Shedeur Sanders. Then you get to number 7 with the New York Jets. They signed Justin Fields. Does that rule them out of drafting Shedeur Sanders? No. But also the Jets have a lot of needs. They have a lot of needs. So I don't know if drafting a quarterback is going to help them win now and help build around Justin Fields. I'm almost adamant that they're going to go offensive linemen at this point. Then you have number 8 to the Panthers. They have Bryce Young. They're not doing that. Number 9 is where we actually start to get some interesting conversations, because the New Orleans Saints on the surface would not be going after a quarterback because they have Derek Carr. They drafted Spencer Rattler. And now there's an issue where Derek Carr, it came out over the weekend that he has an injury to his throwing shoulder that could require surgery. And if he gets surgery, it could potentially take him out for the entire 2025 season. And at that point, do you go with Spencer Rattler and see what you have in him? Or do you draft Shedeur Sanders and pair him with a guy like Kellen Moore? Now, the thing with why Shedeur Sanders can make sense in New Orleans is because you already have an offensive-minded head coach in Kellen Moore. Kellen Moore has a quarterback background. He has coached Dak Prescott. He has coached Justin Herbert. He has coached Jalen Hurts. All 3 quarterbacks under his coaching have done really, really well and had some of the best years of their career. Not to mention Dallas, a team that was constantly a playoff team. The Chargers, despite the fact that they missed the playoffs a whole bunch, they had a roster that was playoff caliber that was really good. And then Philly had one of the best rosters in recent memory and just won the Super Bowl. So not only does Kellen Moore have the quarterback background to coach a quarterback and develop him properly and get the most out of him, at the same time, he also knows what it's like to build a great roster. He knows what that looks like. He knows what that process is like. So you get a quarterback like Shedeur Sanders where he doesn't have all the physical gifts, but with great coaching, you can get the most out of him. And he knows what it takes to build the great roster around the quarterback so you can go win. So there's a very good reason for Shedeur Sanders to go to New Orleans, and I think it would be a decent situation if he sat. The thing is, if he goes to New Orleans, I don't think he's going to sit, and I don't know how good that's going to work out for him. But moving on to the Bears, they don't need Caleb Williams. And then you get picks 11 to 20, and there's no team on that list from 11 to 20 that is looking for Shedeur Sanders. All of them have a quarterback that they like, that they want to keep around. The only one that's kind of in the air is the 49ers with Brock Purdy, but more and more it seems like they're going to overpay for Brock Purdy, and that's going to be another discussion for when it happens. Who knows? Maybe it might just happen tomorrow. That's my luck. Anyways, then you get to pick 21 with the Pittsburgh Steelers. Now, I was going to mention in my mock draft that the Steelers have been buzzing. There's been a buzz that the Steelers were potentially looking to trade up in the draft if Shedeur Sanders fell out of the top 10. And now it seems more that they're probably going to get Shedeur Sanders now. Because if I had to talk about the only 2 realistic situations for Shedeur Sanders to go to is the Steelers or the New Orleans Saints. And if New Orleans is not the pick, they don't pick Shedeur, and he falls to 21, he's going to land at the Pittsburgh Steelers. They need a quarterback. And there's a reason why, the Steelers aren't really getting Aaron Rodgers, because maybe they're looking at Shedeur Sanders, right? Seeing that he could potentially fall to 21. And if he falls to 21, boom, you have your quarterback of the future. So they're looking at that and trying to, be quiet, not make moves. And if that's the case, and if ultimately he falls to 21 and the Steelers take Shedeur Sanders, they're going to look like geniuses for not going after Aaron Rodgers and playing everything so cool and calm like we had talked about, and how the Steelers were kind of like doing this weird thing with Aaron Rodgers. Okay, no, they're just trying to keep it close, play their cards close, and with bam, they don't do it. They don't have to move anything, and bam, their franchise quarterback falls into their laps. But the only other team I could envision making a trade to get Shedeur Sanders if he falls is the Los Angeles Rams, and they're picking at 26. So if they want Shedeur Sanders, he would have to slide to pick 20, and that would require the Rams to trade up with the Denver Broncos to leapfrog the Steelers. They would have to leapfrog the Steelers if they want Shedeur Sanders, which would not be a bad situation. I think it would be one of the best situations Shedeur Sanders could go to. And not to mention, this trade could make more sense because we don't really know where these receivers are going to land. I can almost guarantee that if the Broncos trade down with the Rams, they could get Emeka Egbuka. They could get Luther Burden. Heck, Matthew Golden could fall, right? Some people are as high on Matthew Golden as he was compared to the beginning of the draft process. So they could still get a wide receiver that I think they could really need. Or If Amari Hampton is off the board already, which I'm pretty sure he will be, probably to Chicago, picking at 26, if all the receivers are off the board, you have much better value to select a running back, which they also need, where a guy like TreVeyon Henderson, for example, out of Ohio State, makes a little bit more sense at pick 26 compared to pick 20. So that's a realistic trade that could make sense. Do I think the Rams would do that? No, I think they're more comfortable sticking and picking because the diversity of players in this draft, especially here at the back end of the first round and beginning of the second, are not that far apart. There's not really a need to move up to take a quarterback, right? When you have Matthew Stafford for a while, you don't need to worry about that right now. Get a player that's going to help you win now and continue competing. But for the Steelers, it seems like now the most likely scenario for him to go is the Pittsburgh Steelers, which in my next mock draft, which will come out here in a couple days, I'm going to have to redo it and reevaluate everything about what's going to happen at the top of the draft with Shedeur Sanders not going there. Shedeur Sanders is probably going to be the pick. But I will say this, before we get out of here, there's a couple more things I want to talk about at the top of the draft. Because if Shedeur Sanders falls past the Raiders, he goes past the Browns, past the Giants, past the Raiders, the New Orleans Saints have been rumored. I'm pretty sure it was I think it was confirmed that they had called the Tennessee Titans about what it would take to trade up to the first overall pick. I'm pretty sure that call has been made. So the Saints have been rumored to trade up to get a quarterback if they really like one of these guys. If Shedeur Sanders falls to 7 to the New York Jets, there is a real possibility to just move up 2 spots that the Saints could move up, take Shedeur, and then the Jets move back. The Panthers are 100% taking a defensive player, in my opinion. So the Jets, who are adamant, I think I'm adamant about taking an offensive lineman, if they swap 2 spots, not only is the capital not that much, right? For the New Orleans Saints, you're not giving up a whole bunch to move up from 9 to 7 compared to 9 to 1, 9 to 2, 9 to 3, 9 to 4, right? For example. And the Jets will still get their preferred offensive lineman choice, in my opinion. Maybe not with Jacksonville, which we'll talk about here in a second. But they're going to get one of them. They're going to at least get Will Campbell or Ahmad Membo, and they need left tackle and right tackle. So either way, they're going to get a player that they need that's going to help them in 2025. So if Shedeur falls past the Raiders, I would expect that 15-minute or 10-minute clock to go down quite a ways before a pick is made. Because I guarantee you the Saints are going to call the Jets about trading up. Because that is a real possibility. It makes sense for both teams. So keep an eye out for that. But ultimately, I don't think that move is made. I don't see the New Orleans Saints as an organization that's aggressive like that to move up. So I think Shedeur Sanders is going to slide. And if he slides, he's going to fall to the Pittsburgh Steelers right in their lap where he takes them at 21. But going back to the top. And the Shedeur Sanders conversation is kind of over at this point, but this is more about what it means for the rest of the teams at the top of the draft. So Shedeur Sanders falls out of the top 10. It'll be Cam Ward, Abdul Carter, Travis Hunter at 3, the first 3 picks. Now the Patriots have a situation. They were hoping to get Travis Hunter or Abdul Carter. Those guys are gone. So now you have 3 options in my opinion. You can either take Mason Graham, the defensive tackle out of Michigan. If you still want a defensive player, they need a defensive tackle. And you look at where Mike Vrabel came from in Tennessee. Who did he have as an anchor of his defense? Jeffrey Simmons. So that makes a lot of sense. Will Campbell makes a lot of sense. A tackle, right? Very blue collar, very, hard. He's a very hard worker, right? And also has a chip on his shoulder. He is willing to go out there and prove himself at tackle. But if not, he can move into guard. And who did Mike Vrabel take in his last year with his first round pick? A tackle that ended up moving into guard, Peter Skoronski. So there's a lot of correlation there. And then lastly, Tetaroa McMillan could be a spot. The Patriots also need a number 1 wide receiver to go with Stephon Diggs. They don't have anybody else so far of note that is worth, talking about. Jalen Polk, I know, 2nd round pick. Javon Baker, 4th round pick. Both guys are talented, but they did nothing last year. So I want to see them do more before I start really including them in a conversation of, okay, these are definite weapons that Drake May has to throw to. So they could go Tetaroa McMillan. And you look at his game. okay run after catch ability, not as good, but for that X receiver, 50-50 ball guy, right? He's really good at that. Mike Vrabel had A.J. Brown. All three of these players have links and connections to previous players that Mike Vrabel coached in Tennessee. So all three of those ideas are on the table. And so let's say they take Mason Graham, they take, Bill Campbell or Tetairoa McMillan. But you get to Jacksonville. If the Patriots end up taking Mason Graham, that's going to affect the Jaguars. Because I've had the Jaguars drafting Mason Graham all the way through the process so far, as of most people, because they need a defensive tackle. Their defensive tackle group was one of the worst position groups in the entire NFL, regardless of any position. So they need that. But if Mason Graham isn't available at 5, they could go Will Campbell at tackle, right? They don't really need a tackle, right? They have Walker Little there. They gave him a 3-year deal. They have Anton Harrison at right tackle. He's a first-round pick. But if you're one of the people that believe Will Campbell's a guard, he'll slide in right at guard. Urza Cleveland's okay, but he's a starter. He's not a star. But you get Will Campbell, who I think if he moves into guard, he can be fantastic. And you talk about, or you mentioned Liam Cohen, the new head coach in Jacksonville, talking about so much, almost ad nauseum, how they need to protect the quarterback. So if Mason Graham is not available, Will Campbell will probably be the most next likely pick for them. Because you can slide him in at guard. If Walker Little doesn't work out, you can kick him out to tackle and see what happens. But more than likely, Walker Little is serviceable at best, and you have a really, really good prospect at guard that has all pro potential there. The thing is, the other needs that Jacksonville needs, other than offensive line and defensive tackle, wide receiver, tight end, defensive back are all big needs. You can't draft one of those guys into those positions 5th overall. Right? For Jacksonville, receiver doesn't make sense because they already drafted Brian Thomas Jr. with the first-round pick. That's investing too many high-end picks at wide receiver. Although it's possible. It's very much possible they could do that. I don't envision that, but who knows? But tight end is a need. They look like they're going to roll with Brenton Strange. Even then, Tyler Warren at 5 is a massive reach in my opinion. You can pick another better player at 5 at a more premium position. And then defensive back, that would also be a massive reach. Had Will Johnson stayed healthy in 2024, oh yeah, that would be a perfect spot for him to go. But with the injury, now it's kind of iffy. That would be a big gamble if you took Will Johnson there. Johnny Barron's not worth a top 5 pick. So I don't know. That's probably not going to happen. So if Jacksonville doesn't get Mason Graham, they're more than likely to take Will Campbell. But what if there's rumors that the Raiders want Shedeur Sanders? Going back to the New Orleans Saints, I ended up making it full circle unintentionally. Now, instead of the Saints trading up 2 spots for the Jets to take Shedeur Sanders, now they could jump to 5 to pick Shedeur Sanders and leapfrog the Raiders. Because out of the 3 teams in the top 6 that are likely to pick Shedeur Sanders in the draft, the Raiders by far now are more likely, in my opinion. So if the Saints feel that the Raiders are going to take Shedeur Sanders if he's there at 6, there's a real possibility that the Jaguars trade down and accumulate more picks to continue building out their roster, right? If they're picking number 9, they can still take Will Campbell. Well, I don't know if Will Campbell will be available, but maybe not, right? You could take... No, I wouldn't take Armand Membo because even if you move him into guard, you signed Patrick Mercari at right guard. And with Anton Harrison at right tackle, that wouldn't make a lot of sense unless you try to move him to left guard, which that also doesn't make sense, right? But then, Tetairoa McMillan could still be on the board. You could take him there and have better value for the pick, right? He's talented enough to be a top 10 pick. Or you could trade down further and accumulate more picks, right? You could. It's just... I don't think Jacksonville would be willing to trade down if they have the option between Mason Graham or Will Campbell, right? As even if Mason Graham is off the board and goes to the Patriots, I don't think the Jaguars are going to pass up on Will Campbell. I don't think they're going to, right? So that could not be, it's a possibility. I just don't think that's possible. But ultimately, to wrap it all up, the Shedeur Sanders, I think ultimately now will fall to the Pittsburgh Steelers at 21. But do not be surprised if by the time the Jaguars are on the clock and if the Jets are on the clock, do not be surprised if that timer on draft night dips below for 3 minutes, because that will tell you that the New Orleans Saints are moving. They are trying to move up and make a trade. There is calls being made. So expect that. I will be talking about that more as the NFL draft happens. I'll be going live during the NFL draft for the first round. So that's going to be fun and exciting. So we'll talk about it as it unfolds live in person, you and I together. But until then, we'll figure it all. It's more speculation, right? My next mock draft will be coming out here in a couple of days. I have to redo it and fix it, and then we'll see going on from there. But for now, that will do it for me. Hope you guys have enjoyed this video. If you liked it, please consider leaving a like and hitting the subscribe button for the channel. It helps us out, helps me out tremendously as I continue to grow and spread my football passion to more and more people. Also, let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. Do you think Shedeur Sanders falls to the Steelers? Do you think the Saints trade up to get Shedeur? Or does he fall to number 9 and the Saints just take him there at 9? Or do the Browns, the Giants, or the Raiders ultimately take Shedeur Sanders regardless of all the stuff saying that they will not? So let me know all your thoughts there. Thirdly, make sure you guys are sharing the video, whether it's by social media or by word of mouth, getting everybody locked on to the Should Make Take podcast, coming out with great content for you guys every single week. And then lastly, make sure to follow me on social media on TikTok, Instagram, X/Twitter, Facebook. I have all social media platforms there. I will be uploading clips more frequently here this week. So go check that out if you really want to. But until then, hope you guys have enjoyed, and I will see you all next time.